Hey, what's going on? This is the Body Punch Podcast. My name is Naz. Let's talk about Anderson Silva versus Jake Paul. Jake Paul's next fight is against the greatest of all time in MMA, Anderson the Spider Silva. Surprisingly, this is Jake Paul's next fight. Everybody thought, and Jake Paul including, that Anderson Silva would be later down the road. Jake Paul really wanted to fight other fighters, including Tommy Fury and Rahman Jr., but that is not the case. He's going to be taking on Anderson Silva. And Silva is noted to be one of the great strikers in MMA history. Dana White multiple times saying that this is going to be a tough test for Jake Paul. A lot of people are saying that this is crazy, that this kid who's a YouTuber at a young age met Anderson Silva is now facing off with the Spider. This is going to be a very interesting contest in terms of how is Jake Paul going to feel in the moment. We've already seen him at the press conference. It seems like it's a very cordial affair at the moment. It seems like there's respect from both Anderson Silva and Jake Paul. Both of them being weirdly, Anderson is known to be very cordial with his opponents, being very respectful with everybody he's faced, unless they kind of just say something to him and are very aggressive to him. To be honest with you, most of his time in the UFC was done with a translator. Every once in a while, he might say something in English, but a lot of it was done with that translator. A little bit of the boxing that he's done thus far against Tito Ortiz was the press conferences were in English. But to my knowledge, this is one of the first times that Anderson Silva has done a press conference strictly in English, and he was really respectful in this one. And I think it's throwing Jake Paul off a little, meaning he's so used to someone coming in and being aggressive towards him. And this is Jake Paul, who I'm talking about. Tyron Woodley, especially in the first fight. Ben Askren really trying to get into Jake Paul's head. Nate Robinson wasn't too crazy, but for sure he was mentioning things here and there that were a little bit irritating to Jake Paul. And Anderson Silva is a totally different beast. A person that really lives by those old school martial arts ways of life and all that kind of stuff. He's not going to go out there and be the hyper aggressive type that he may be used to. And on top of that, like I said at the beginning of this podcast, someone that Jake Paul has looked up to for a very, very long time. If you listen to Logan Paul's podcast as well, Jake Paul's older brother, he's mentioned it a bunch of times that Anderson Silva was somewhat of a staple in their household, someone that both of the brothers admired and watched a lot. So how will Jake Paul, live in the moment? How will he excel in the moment against Anderson Silva, who's had so many fights in the UFC, had so many fights outside of the UFC, has had a couple of boxing matches, including one against Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., which was a big one in Mexico. And the list goes on and on for his MMA accolades and the amount of fights that he's had, even in his later age, going against big time names like Israel Adesanya, Daniel Cormier, Michael Bisping. A lot of those were losses near the end of his career. But before that, we all remember the Chael Sonnen fight, Vitor Belfort fight, the Forrest Griffin fight, all of these spectacular KOs that he had in his career. And for Jake Paul to go up against someone like Anderson Silva, who you can go in with all the confidence in the world, and that's what Jake Paul is doing right now. He's going in there super confident, what it seems like. But when you watch the tape and when you see the stuff that Anderson Silva is doing later on in his career in boxing, knocking out Tito Ortiz the way he did, it seemed like Tito wasn't even meant to be in the same ring as Anderson Silva. And for him to, it was like surprising when he took out Junior in Mexico. And obviously his father was fighting on the card as well. And it was supposed to be a big coming out party for a lot of them. And it was supposed to be a celebration for the whole family. And it seemed like, from what I understood, that it was a big surprise that Anderson Silva did what he did to Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. and getting the split decision win. And for what Jake Paul has shown thus far and the way that he is learning and he's bringing new things to every single one of his fights is truly impressive. And for someone to live in the moment the way that he is, and I'm going to mention this a lot in these podcasts talking about this fight, because obviously we're going to do a lot more about this, is that Jake Paul is so ready for the moment. He's so, in tuned with visualizing the KO, visualizing the win. And for him to take on Anderson Silva, who right now it's Jake Paul versus MMA, and for Jake Paul to take out Tyron Woodley, to take out Ben Askren, who was, they were both, especially Tyron Woodley, at this point when they were facing off against Jake Paul, they were really holding up the banner of MMA. And Jake Paul viciously KO'd both of them. Took out Ben Askren, TKO win, and then KO'd Tyron Woodley. Like brutally. All over SportsCenter, all over the highlights, everywhere on social media. It was crazy. And so now Anderson Silva is going to go into this situation where a lot of the MMA fans and everybody watching has seen Jake Paul done these crazy things to MMA fighters so far. He's going to be kind of the shining knight that is going to hold up the banner for MMA. And if Jake Paul is able to, even just get a decision win over Anderson Silva, it's just, it'll be nuts. It would be crazy. He mentions it so much that it's ingrained in our heads that this guy was Disney star, YouTuber for kids, and now he's taking on and potentially going to beat Anderson Silva, which is crazy. These worlds are getting meshed together, and nobody would have bet that this would have happened. Anderson Silva is that final boss. He's the greatest striker that MMA has to offer that's in Jake Paul's weight class. He's taller than Jake Paul. He's had more experience than Jake Paul. He's won belts in multiple organizations and has already faced a true boxer in Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. And Jake Paul hasn't. He was supposed to do it against Tommy Fury, Hakeem Rahman Jr., and I bet you there was a couple other names that he was supposed to fight, and the fight never happened. And this is that fight. He's going past, he's skipping a lot of levels and then going up against Anderson Silva, who, like I said before, just recently fought Israel Adesanya, who in my eyes is the number one striker in the UFC. And that was in 2019. That was right before the pandemic in Australia, which is crazy. And that was a pure striking affair in that fight. There wasn't any takedowns. There wasn't anything like that. And without the takedowns, like in some of the other fights that Anderson Silva has had later on in his career, without those takedowns, without like bringing in other elements in MMA, just pure striking, he was going back and forth with Israel Adesanya, who's younger than him, stronger than him, and obviously that means that he's more fit than him. And Anderson was having a straight up boxing match, kickboxing match with Israel Adesanya and keeping up. So it's just so tough and hard for me to believe that someone can go in that confident against Anderson Silva. For Jake Paul to do what he's doing right now, and not even, the fight it's not even close to happening yet. And still, he's so confident. And the fight hasn't even started. Nothing has happened thus far. And he is still showing this confidence that, like, I know something that nobody else knows. He has a secret that he hasn't told anybody. And that's what it looked like in this press conference. But it makes me think a little bit of how respectful he is to Anderson Silva and how much he's boosting him up. And this might be the case because Anderson's not going to do what his previous opponents have done and boost the fight like that. I think this is one of those that the play is basically, this guy's the greatest of all time. He's the best that MMA has to offer, and I'm going to take him on. That's the only thing that Anderson Silva is really bringing to this fight, which is a big thing. I mean, named the best striker in the UFC now, before, whenever. Anderson Silva is number one. Israel Adesanya is up there. A couple other guys are up there. But this is the best that MMA has to offer thus far, without pulling out one of the champions or, someone that's under contract with the UFC. The best free agent right now, not like under contract, nothing to do with the UFC, is Anderson Silva when it comes to MMA. Like, you can talk about Nate Diaz, even though he's not technically a free agent right now. You can talk about some other guys who are potentially going to be free agents, and they don't bring the physical attributes to Jake Paul like Anderson Silva will. In this fight, like I said, the height, the weight, Anderson's fought at like 205 against Daniel Cormier at one point. And he's done crazy things in the sport. So for him to take on someone like this, who, I don't know where you go after this. Like, you have to fight like a real boxer at this point, meaning whoever is willing to fight you after this. If you get a win over Anderson Silva and then you parlay that into a fight with Nate Diaz, which I think, in my opinion, he doesn't bring the physical attributes. Like a guy that fought at 155, who fought maximum, like his average for weight was at 170. Like some of the Conor fight was at 170. The last fight that he had was at 170 against Tony Ferguson. He's a smaller guy. Like this is the guy that Anderson Silva is the guy that brings the physical attributes, the striking ability. The one thing is the age and the injuries and stuff like that. So we'll see. Jake Paul's coming into this super confident. Anderson Silva seems like he's super confident. Anderson Silva is cool, calm, collective, and he's always like that, which is cool to see. And if Anderson wins this fight, that's a massive big deal for him as well. Like I'm sure there's going to be a rematch right after. I'm sure that he's going to go on to do bigger and better things after. And this is just a stepping stone for both of these fighters. This is just something that could elevate both of their careers in a good way. So thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. Leave a comment below. What do you think of this fight? What did you think of the press conference? I would really like to know what you thought of both fighters and how you feel about Jake Paul taking this approach to fighting Anderson Silva. And what do you think of Anderson Silva and the way that he's approaching this Jake Paul fight? I'd really like to know. Leave a comment below. Leave a comment on or leave a review on Apple Music and all that kind of stuff. Leave 5 stars. It really helps. Subscribe. Hit the bell notification on YouTube. I really appreciate it. Thank you for listening. This has been the Body Punch Podcast. My name is Nat. Bye.